you've said a few times now that the prorogation was necessary so that the government could work on the speech. So I'm just wondering, you know, how many people were all working on this speech? And, you know, like, what do you think government would, what jobs would government have been doing if Parliament was sitting that it didn't do during prorogation? Because what I'm hearing is that proroguing meant that the government was off the hook for all sorts of work that otherwise would have kept it so busy that it couldn't have written a half-hour speech. So what were the things that government wasn't doing while prorogation was in effect such that you were able to commit so much time and resources to this apparently momentous speech?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Blaikie, and also thank you for the work for your party on in this crisis, because we were able, and as I said to Mr. Terrien and Mr. Deltel, to work together to help Canadians, and that included all of you guys. We needed to send a clear message that the government was fully concentrating all its efforts on this, clear message to the population, clear message to all the public servants. We needed that reset so we can focus, so we could consult, because there's been also a lot of consultation, and that takes time. It doesn't take 3 days.
Indeed it does. So what is the work that your government did not perform that it otherwise would have done if there had been no prorogation? Because what you're telling me is that prorogation let you off the hook from certain kinds of work in order to focus on a speech from the throne. So what work was it that you weren't doing as a result of prorogation that gave you so much more time that you're telling us was needed in order to get a speech from the throne right? What were you not doing during prorogation that you would have been doing if the House had been sitting? And incidentally, it was only supposed to sit for 1 day out of that entire period that it was prorogued. So was it just during the sitting day that you guys were working on the speech from the throne and you really needed that time, or were there other days that you weren't doing things that you would have been doing
Mr.
otherwise?
Blaikie, you know that a speech from the throne takes time. It takes time because you're not there sitting by yourself in a room, drafting a few notes, consult. You go out, you consult. People are on the ground, experts from the business sector, from the social sector.
So during the pandemic response, during the pandemic response, while Parliament was sitting, you weren't consulting with people, because you're telling me you only had time to consult if Parliament's prorogued.
It amplifies
that civic consultation and Parliament sitting are incompatible for your government. Have I got that right?
It amplifies the effort. It puts a focus on what we're doing. It sends a clear message to public servants, to all of us, to everyone, that we're really, really concentrating on that. Through all the discussions also with the provinces, you know what? There's no recipe to manage a crisis, Mr. Blaikie. You know that. Like, when we got there, who knew about COVID-19? No one.
So in what ways was Parliament distracting you from consulting with civil society on the direction that we should be taking? Like, what was the burden you were relieved of in order to be able to focus more on consulting with Canadians, which apparently you hadn't been doing much of prior to prorogation, at least not effectively, which is why you needed the time off from Parliament, if I understand you correctly.
I wouldn't call it distraction, because the work that Parliament does and committee does and you guys in the opposition do is fundamental. So, but what we wanted... So
could we not have continued doing that work while your government consulted?
We did everything we could. Listen, we've been going on for months, sitting down with the opposition, putting, piece here and piece there. I think we needed a clear vision, something more broad, based on consultation, something very, very clear, a path to follow, because again, none of us is an expert in managing a crisis of that size, of a pandemic.
But did it make sense to take that time while there was a looming deadline for the expiration of CERB and millions of Canadians wondering what was going to happen to their household income, looking to Parliament to be hammering out a solution, and instead seeing that the work of Parliament had stopped in that regard? I mean, couldn't the timing of this have been different? And if your government really felt the need to have a confidence, an expression of confidence by the House, I mean, speech from the throne is not the only tool to do that. I mean, the opposition have been calling for a budget for some time by then, but also there's the option for your government at any time to introduce a motion to the effect of whether or not the House has confidence in the government or not. You don't need a speech from the throne to do it. You don't need a budget to do it. A simple motion would have been good enough. It would have allowed the work of Parliament to continue through the weeks between August 18th and when Parliament went back. I mean, why not those options? Why not test the confidence of the House with a simple motion and then wait for the consultative effort until after we had done right by Canadians and made it clear what would happen on the day that the CERB program expired, instead of leaving it till the 11th hour, which caused a lot of unneeded stress and anxiety for many Canadian families in very difficult positions.
I think, Mr. Blaikie, that getting the confidence of the House on this broad, very detailed program was sending a clear message, and I think that was necessary. And I think that it was definitely the right thing to do.
I just have to disagree that the speech from the throne provided a detailed program. Most of it was a rehash of things we had heard before. The details Canadians were really interested in were the details of what had happened with the We Charity scandal, particularly students.
Thank you, Mr. Blaikie. That's all the time you...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You've said a few times that, we should believe that the consultation requirements for the speech from the throne were sufficient reason in order to accept that the government prorogued Parliament when it did, even though there were several investigations into the We Charity scandal going on at the time, even though it followed right on the heels of the resignation of the finance minister, apparently as a result of the same scandal. And even though there was still a lot of work yet to be done on how to replace CERB with another income support program to not leave millions of Canadian families out in the cold. But this isn't, the question isn't whether consultation is required when you're doing a speech like that. The question is whether government has resources to both consult and continue to do the job of the government. And what I'm hearing is that you don't believe that the government could continue to do the job of the government, including being accountable to Parliament, and consult adequately to prepare a speech from the throne. And I find that incredible, because it seems to me that government ought to continuously be consulting on important initiatives, even as it runs the country and is responsible to Parliament. So what I can't fathom is how your government thinks it doesn't have the resources to consult with people about a meaningful speech from the throne while continuing to do the job of running the nation, including being accountable to Parliament. Why do you think your government can't pull off being consultative and accountable to Parliament at the same time?
Well, with all respect, Mr. Blaikie, you're coming back to the same question you asked twice. So this is the third time, and I did answer.
I haven't got a good answer yet. I continue to give you opportunities to impress.
I'm sorry if you don't like my answer. I'm doing my best.
And you continue to disappoint.
To give you a good answer. But the thing is that we needed that plan, and I said it in both languages before. We went as far as we could. We did everything we could to try to manage this crisis, project by project, bill by bill, this and that. We needed a frame, like a master frame that would lead us to this fight, the second wave, and this is what we did.
And what I'm saying is that you had a duty to prepare that plan if you really felt that that's what was needed, while engaging with parliamentarians on the question of how to replace CERB. So it wasn't done at the last minute, as it ultimately was. And there have been issues with some of the programs that were designed and agreed to there that we might have been able to foresee and prevent had we had parliamentary time to study them. And you had a duty to prepare that framework, even while answering important questions about how you guys really let down a lot of students in the summer, because you didn't give them access to CERB. You gave them access to a reduced emergency benefit on the pretense that there was going to be a job program for them that never came to be, because people were playing footsie under the table with folks at We Charity. And it's students that bore the real price of that, because they didn't get the job program that was promised to them to make up for the fact that they didn't get the same income replacement that they would have got on CERB.
We have